Welcome back, everybody. Another thing we will now take a look at is IPsec VPN on FortiGate, and I want to start this session with a discussion on two implementations, two types of implementations of VPN tunnels available on FortiGate for IPsec, policy-based versus route-based, and then we will take a look at configuration steps to see how to enable site-to-site VPN between a FortiGate and another VPN device. FortiGate supports two types of IPsec VPN tunnel implementations. We've got what is known as the policy-based and route-based implementation. The difference, as we will see, is going to be primarily in the interface that is going to be kind of like responsible for establishing the tunnel, or just basically representing a VPN tunnel, I should say. And the other difference is going to be in the firewall policy action that we will use to activate the VPN tunnel. Now, specifically with policy-based approach, as we will see, the IPsec services are actually activated for the firewall policy role. And it's going to be the regular interfaces of the firewall what will be involved in the VPN setup, like for instance inside and outside. If we take a look at this in our network, if we were to deploy a policy-based VPN, we would basically configure our policy, firewall policy, with a source interface set to, in this case, port 1, assuming that we wanted to establish a tunnel with a device reachable for the internet. The source interface would be set to port 1. The destination interface would be set to port 2 towards the peer. And what would be also important is that we would then add our subnets. This would make our local subnet, that the subnet that we want to protect. We want to communicate with a remote subnet that is going to be reachable via the tunnel. Let's say that it's going to be X. So my source subnet in this case would be 10.1.1.0/24, of course, assuming that this is what I want to protect. And then remote subnet would be X. And now another important thing is that inside of the actual policy rule, you would use the IPsec action and not accept, not deny, because IPsec action is, this is the key distinction between these two methods. IPsec action basically, it tells the firewall to apply IPsec services. So it's kind of like that our policy role that normally controls communication that the firewall wants to accept or drop, in this case is what tells the firewall what traffic we want to protect with IPsec and what traffic is going to trigger IPsec negotiation. So it's like two different responsibilities of the policy role with a policy-based approach for IPsec VPNs. First and foremost, tell the firewall what traffic is going to trigger the negotiation, and second, also control the traffic, or just like allow the packets to go through within the VPN tunnel. In this case, remote subnets would be configured to point through the outgoing interface towards the peer, which in our case would be the outside interface. So I would say that to get to X, I would be routing traffic to out of port 2 at this interface over here. And policy-based approach, this is legacy configuration. You can think of it as of a crypto map on Cisco devices. A better approach and recommended approach today is to use route-based implementation. You guys don't forget to subscribe if you like our content. Thanks. in which case the firewall is going to create a separate virtual interface that is going to represent the VPN tunnel known as a virtual interface. So now looking at a route-based implementation versus policy-based method, the first difference is that we will not be using the IPsec action when we configure route-based VPNs. Our firewall policy is only going to be used to control the traffic that traverses the VPN tunnel. It is not used to establish a VPN tunnel or just activate the VPN itself. It is only used for traffic control like what it normally does. So no IPsec action involved in this case. And we will take a look at this in the GUI when we get to the configuration steps. And now the other difference is that when you configure a route to the remote subnet, you would want to point to the virtual interface, which once again represents the VPN tunnel. So going back to our example, to our topology here, if this was route-based implementation, the first thing is that inside of the policy, I would say that my source interface would be configured. Well, this actually does not change. Assuming that we want to build a tunnel, protect the traffic between 10.1.1.0/24 and subnet X on the internet, the source interface would be port 1 because this is what goes to the local network, local VPN network, and then destination interface would be configured as, and this is going to be a change, as a virtual interface. So virtual interface is gonna kind of like represent the IPsec tunnel on the FortiGate side. This would still be my source subnet, and then the destination subnet would be X. But another difference is that for X, we would tell it that to get to X, we would want to send the traffic to VIF, to the virtual interface, and not the physical port. So notice that also in the policy, of course, when you then account for the other direction, because now we focus on the traffic that goes from the FortiGate to the destination peer, but then as we get that traffic back, or basically when we get packets from the VPN peer, we would also have to add another role with a source interface of VIF, and then the destination interface of the port 1. If this was policy-based, we would basically flip port 1 with port 2, and it would be port 2 what would make the source and port 1 the destination. Okay, the policy action in this case is going to be regular, except once again, no special considerations here. There are two ways as how we can configure VPN tunnels on FortiGate. Actually, three ways. The first method, the easiest one, is going to be to use what is known as a VPN Wizard. The second method is going to be to configure a tunnel kind of like manually using the VPN tunnels option. And the third method is going to be to use the command line. Now, just in case if you guys want to use the command line approach, or maybe you want to learn more about the VPN tunnel settings, let me quickly show you this in the documentation. This is something that you will be able to find under IPsec VPN. And I would look at, in this case, a site-to-site VPN. They give you more examples for the syntax, and they give you a little bit more information when you click on FortiGate to FortiGate, like basic site-to-site VPN with pre-shared key. This is where they tell you what steps you need to take in the GUI. using the VPN Wizard. This is the topology for this configuration. And also down here, they show you the command line equivalent. It's all about config VPN IPsec phase 1 interface and config VPN IPsec phase 2 interface. Everything else is objects, firewall policy, and routes. VPN Wizard is the simplest method, as I said. Just one thing you need to remember about, assuming that you want to go for the old method, the old style policy-based VPN, is that you would need to first enable it under feature visibility. Maybe before I enable it over here, let's go back and take a look at the policy objects firewall policy. If I were to add a rule right now, the only two types of actions I have available is accept and deny. So assuming that you wanted to use policy-based method, you would first want to go to feature visibility, additional features, and choose policy-based IPsec VPN, apply this configuration. And then if you looked at the firewall policy, an additional setting that exists under action is IPsec. Okay, we will not be using this method. I'm going to show you configuration for the recommended approach, the route-based implementation. So I'm going to disable policy-based IPsec VPN under feature visibility. Okay, maybe let's quickly take a look at the VPN Wizard before we look at the other method. So it's going to be all about VPN and VPN tunnels, VPN and VPN Wizard, where you can choose one of the 3 templates available. This is site-to-site. Another one is for hub and spoke VPNs, and the last one is for remote access. So if we choose the first template, which is for site-to-site, it is gonna, well, it wants us to give it the name, like R2 VPN Wizard. And it's gonna ask you to select the type of the remote device. In our case, if I wanted to build a tunnel with router 2 is a Cisco box, so I would tell it that this is a Cisco device. I would configure address of router 2, which is 192.0.2.2. I would configure a remote subnet that is protected by router 2, which in this case would be 169.2.2.0/24. I would then choose next and configure authentication method. Choose IKE version, let's say IKE v1, a key, enable, disable NAT reversal. This is the second step in the wizard. And the third one is going to be to configure the settings for the local device for this particular FortiGate VPN appliance. So first thing, I would want to tell it what is the interface that is going to be used to reach that peer, and which is going to be bound to the virtual interface that it is going to automatically generate for us. Okay, so that would be, in my case, it would be port 2, because port 2 is towards router 2. So I would choose this interface over here. I could also say that I want to create a zone, associate a zone with this interface, and then I would tell it what is the local interface, which is interface that is connected to my private subnet that I want to protect, that I want to make accessible for the VPN, like 10.1.1.0/24. So I would choose port 1 inside. But the problem, as you can tell, is that because of the permanent license limitations, or this particular code, 7.6.0, for some reasons the GUI is not happy with the settings and the type of settings that you can put for the wizard, or even the tunnel settings, like when you configure the tunnel from scratch. It just doesn't take this configuration. It's probably a bug or a limitation of the license, and because of that, we will not be able to actually test this setup. But I will still want to show you the other approach, which is going to be the VPN tunnels option, which is how you can configure the tunnel from scratch without using the wizard. Okay, so as an alternative, you could go to VPN tunnels directly. The VPN tunnels is also where you will see the actual VPN tunnels existing on the system. But if you wanted to build something from scratch, you could say you want to use template, which is basically the wizard, the same as the wizard thing. You could use the custom IPsec tunnel. That's the option to build a tunnel from scratch. So that would be, the actual configuration is going to be pretty much similar here. We would have to specify the address of the peer, the interface that we use to reach it. So I reach my remote gateway router using the outside interface. I would choose the transport. I would set it as UDP or use ADO. Enable, disable net traversal, dead peer detection. Advanced settings is not something you have to play with for site to site, but you would want to choose authentication method, version of FIC, give it a key if this is going to be key-based authentication. Then we would want to select the proposals and the Hellman grip number, possibly tune the lifetime, change the local identifier, and then outer phrase two selectors. This is how you would configure the settings for the virtual tunnel interface. So tunnel mode would be probably what you want to use for full protection. This is where you can specify addresses for proxy IDs. If this is going to be the route-based implementation, you want to leave the subnets as zeros. If you disable PFS, actually not disable PFS. The other thing is that you would have to select the crypto functions for phase 2 negotiation and to protect the data packets, at least one proposal. Then you can enable, disable replay protection and PFS. If you disable PFS, you don't have to choose the Hellman grip number. Local port, remote port, and protocol. This is what could potentially narrow down the scope of negotiation. I would leave it all as all. And then auto negotiation, which is how you can do retransmissions. I would basically use these options, so leave them at their defaults. Now, the reason that we see an entry here under VPN tunnels, because once again it wouldn't take the GUI config, is that I use the command line to configure, to give it some settings. We say show VPN IPsec phase 1-interface. So this is configuration that I added via the CLI. The same applies to phase 2. That's the reason why we see some entries here in the GUI. Again, the GUI is broken on this code, on this license. But at least it displays those settings. So that would be basically the result of configuring this, either using the wizard or directly from the VPN tunnels. It's the same options that I just discussed: address, IC version, authentication, proposals for phase 1. Then for phase 2, it would be the tunnel mode it would be the proxy identities like 4 zeros. It would be the data protection proposals, PFS, and lifetime, and some other options. So now, assuming that you've got all this stuff in place, you would want to take a look at the interfaces and the firewall policy before you actually bring up the tunnel, try to bring up the tunnel and start negotiation. Okay, so first thing, I would go to network and interfaces. With this basic VPN config, you should see that the system would automatically create an virtual IPsec interface. So this is the VIF I was talking about at the beginning of this session. We see that it automatically binds the virtual interface, the tunnel interface, with the interface that it uses to reach the peer. First, we are talking about the route-based implementation. If this was policy-based, you wouldn't see any virtual interfaces. So that would be the first place I would want it to look at. You could even click on this tunnel interface and give it an address. Like if you want to enable routes dynamically across the tunnel. And then the other thing I would do would be to go to the firewall policy, where I would create a policy rule to allow the VPN traffic. So in our case, let's say VPN, R2 VPN in. This is going to be my rule. R2 VPN out is going to be my first rule. The action would be set to accept, or my incoming interface would be set to inside. So to the interface connected to 10.1.1.0/24, what I want to protect. Outgoing would be set to outside, because outside interface port 2 is what I use to reach my peer router 2. Okay, I would give it a source of the protected subnet, (10.1.1.0/24). And then for the destination, I would use the remote VPN subnet 169.2.2.0/24. That would be my destination in this rule. Let's say that we don't pose any restrictions on the communication. I'm going to say all services. Okay, let's say disable NAT, no inspections. You can log security events, enable the policy. So that rule covered just one direction. And hold on a second, I misconfigured the interface here. Of course, the outgoing interface in that example for the outgoing traffic with route-based implementation would be the VPN tunnel, the virtual interface. So inside to a VPN tunnel, like once again, if I had the tunnel built with router 2, and the tunnel will be represented as VIF, that would be my source, and then that would be my destination. And now on the way back, so when to replies, we would see those VPN packets on the VIF as the source, and we would want to make port 1 our destination. So that would be the inbound direction from the peer towards us. Okay, so rule number 1 for traffic to the peer, and then rule for the way back from the virtual interface to inside. Of course, we want to flip the subnets from the remote subnet to the inside network. No NAT. And make sure that the policy is on. Okay, so that would be the policy setup that I would need. I would configure again for route-based implementation. If this was to be a policy-based VPN, you would then configure an IPsec action, and your source and destination interfaces would be the physical ports. Okay, the main place where we would verify our configuration would be the dashboard, a network, and IPsec. You could also take a look at log messages under system events for VPN events, or use the diagnose VPN command. I would go to network, a dashboard, network, and an IPsec widget to start. And from this output here, what it says is that the tunnel is up. Okay, let's quickly do one more thing here. Let's go to the network and static routes. And let's say that we want to add a route for 169.2.2.0/24. And this is going to be through the tunnel. And now on the other side of the tunnel, so on router 2, let's add a route to the 10.1.1.0/24, the subnet, through the tunnel as well. And let's see if we can ping router 2's Ethernet 0/2 from router 1. Which apparently we can. And then let's go back and take a look at this under a dashboard, network, and IPsec. Double click on it, and let's refresh. And we see that actually we see that the count has increased. So apparently this actually started to work. Let's say diagnose a VPN tunnel. Tunnel list. Okay, we see that we've got the tunnel in place. And the other one I want to look at is diagnose VPN IKE gateway list. R2VPN is my config for phase 1. It says established, and we acted as the initiator here. Well, let's also take a look at let's see what's the status is going to tell us. It's again, it says that it's established. And one more I want to look at is going to be the status for IPsec. Okay, but this is for it gives me some statistics about the encryption here. So I would either want to diagnose, look at diagnose VPN tunnel. You can also activate the tunnel from the CLI. I'm going to show you in just a second how to do it from the GUI. And then everything else I would look at diagnose VPN IKE. Look at the gateway to figure out the statistics here. Okay, let's also take a look at this in the policy, because apparently we've got a problem with indirection of the traffic. So we see the counters increase, they go up for the out role. But I don't see anything in the other direction. It might be a problem of router 2. Right, so I wanna remove one static route here to make sure that everything for 10.1.1 goes across the tunnel. Okay, so with router 2 saying that to get to 10.1.1.0/24, you want to go to the tunnel, it means that everything gets encapsulated and FortiGate system gets this stuff. And on the way back, we told it to route to 169.2.2 that it should select the tunnel. So it now fixes communication. We see that everything is fine in both directions. You could technically also take a look at VPN tunnels here. If you wanted to bring down the tunnel, just click on the tunnel entry under the status, like up or down here. Select this entry, and then you can bring down, bring up. You can also reset the statistics. If you double click on it, you can edit the settings directly here. And once again, for verification using the GUI, it would be the dashboard and network activities for IPsec. Okay, so probably the problem could be related to the fact that we didn't have anything in the policy, like the actual firewall policy rule. But again, if you try to start this configuration with a wizard or using a custom tunnel, you may get an error that tells you that there is a problem with some setting, but it doesn't tell you which. So as a workaround, like what I did here, didn't even know that it's gonna eventually give us this ability to test the tunnel, is to use the command line start configuration using the CLI, and then modify the settings from the GUI, configure the policy on the GUI, and eventually test. Of course, if you've got the right license, you will not see a problem like that, and you will be able to configure everything from scratch using the wizard or a VPN tunnels option.